because to this day, they did not want to speak to us, even if they totally disagreed with you, because they told us, to our faces, we are legitimizing a conspiracy theory that isn't doing the public's health any good. So you've been called a conspiracy theorist. You've been called a race traitor. I mean, you're Chinese in origin? Asian?
Well, I have Asian ancestry.
Asian ancestry. Yes. Okay, good. I didn't want to label you
no.
unnecessarily. What has this cost you?
So the surprising thing is that I have actually been a very moderate voice in this entire conversation. Like my stance in 2020 was a lab leak might be unlikely or likely, we don't know, we have to investigate. And today, I have shifted more towards likely, but it's still the same stance, we don't know, we have to investigate. And for that, I've been attacked by people on both ends. So I've been attacked by all these other scientists who say that I'm hurting science. So they've essentially built this cult of science, and they see me attacking it, questioning, whether science is what causes pandemic. So I've gotten a lot of hatred from that crowd for sure. And they've slandered me over the last 4 years and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, you have people who want to be certain that this came from a lab. And so when they see someone like me hedging and saying that, no, we actually don't know yet, we need to collect more evidence, they think that I am actually a stooge. So they actually think that I am protecting science, that I'm preventing a certain conclusion of a lab origin. So actually the hatred and the harassment has been coming from both ends for me. And that is the thing that a lot of these scientists who are criticizing me, they seem to not be able to acknowledge that.
Does that make you worry about the future of scientific integrity when it comes to the global scientific community around virology?
Well, instead of worrying, I think we should take action. And I think I've been encouraged by a lot of rare voices, but they are out there. There are a lot of scientists who have spoken up and are investigating on this issue as much as they can. And for that, I think that there's still hope that there are scientists with integrity who will act sometimes seemingly against the interests of science, but ultimately in the long term, by investigating, by showing that we're not covering up, this is how you earn trust. This is how you show people that you are not covering up. And so I do think that there's hope. And I think that there should be more systems to incentivize scientists to speak the truth, to investigate even when it's inconvenient.
But it seems as if overriding, looming over all of this is more action that could be taken by the U.S. federal government that hasn't happened. And then, as we've said multiple times, the Chinese government, which could hold the answers to all of these questions.
Yes.
Well, Alina Chan, scientific advisor for the Vector Engineering Group at the Stanley Center for Psychiatric Research at the Broad Institute and co-author of Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is On Point.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from WBUR Boston, from the Museum of Science in Boston, dedicated to inspiring a lifelong love of science in everyone, in museums, classrooms, and online, offering engineering design challenges, digital experiences, live presentations, and more. MOS.org. And MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
On this Friday the 13th, this is 94.9 KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham, and on the KUOW app. Inching towards the noon hour and KUOW's Week in Review. To give you a taste of what's coming up, here's your host, Bill Radke.
Thank you for that. Will your Seattle elementary or K-8 school close? Will the return of Seattle's anti-drug and prostitution measures work better than last time? And is it wrong to have ballot initiative signature gathering paid for by a rich person who moved here from California? Plus, what's making us smile? All coming up on Week in Review.
Hi, I'm food and drink writer Tan Vin, here to tell you about a new podcast from KUOW and the Seattle Times. It's called Seattle Eats. I'll be your host and personal guide across our vibrant local food scene. From the best pizza in the Puget Sound to the best wine to buy at Costco, the Seattle Eats podcast is here to help. So let's eat. Our first episode drops Thursday, September 19th on the KUOW app or wherever you get podcasts.
Support for KUOW comes from Cherry Creek Windows and Doors, specializing in sales and installation of replacement windows for Seattle and East Side homes, featuring Marvin Windows and Doors. Learn more at the Wallingford showroom or online at cherrycreekwindows.com. And from the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe, extending an invitation to reflect on Seattle and this region through a native lens and to acknowledge the legacy, stewardship, and culture of Seattle's first people. More at wearemuckleshoot.org.
A national youth voting organization is trying to register more young men of color for the election in November, but can it do so without coming off as pandering?
It's very demeaning sometimes where, you're on a national stage and it's like, oh, if you want to draw in black people, you gotta, have a rapper come in and, be belligerent and things of that nature.
I'm Ari Shapiro. That story on All Things Considered from NPR News.
All Things Considered. This afternoon at 3, right here at 94.9 KUOW. We have partly cloudy skies, expecting a high today of 67. And then this evening, the rain will roll in. It'll stick around all day tomorrow and then taper off on Sunday to partly sunny skies. It's 12:01 and 63 degrees.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. And Ohio City is dealing with a second day of bomb threats and evacuations, including several schools. This comes after the community was catapulted into the national spotlight when former President Donald Trump falsely claimed during the debate that Haitian immigrants were killing and eating pets. Shay Frank of member station WYSO has more.
This morning, Springfield city officials received 2 new bomb threats by email. One targeted city commissioners and a city employee. The other threatened multiple sites. Those included Springfield City Hall, 3 schools, and Bureau of Motor Vehicles locations. Officers inspected the buildings with bomb-sniffing dogs and cleared them. Yesterday, a similar round of emailed threats led to similar actions. The city and FBI continued to investigate the threats. Local civic and faith leaders, as well as members of the Haitian community, have denounced the false rumors and subsequent threats. For NPR News, I'm Shay Frank in Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Trump had more to say today about Ohio's immigrant population.
We will do large deportations from Springfield, Ohio. Large deportations. We're going to get these people out.
Trump continued to make false and dehumanizing remarks about migrants, including use of the word nests, at a news conference in California today. He's headed next to Nevada, one of several stops in part of the country where many voters are especially concerned about the security of the southern U.S. border. Meanwhile, the presidential contest to win over voters in swing states takes Vice President Kamala Harris to heavily Republican areas in Pennsylvania today. 30 years ago, then-President Bill Clinton signed a major crime bill that put more cops on the streets, imposed tougher sentences, and provided federal funds to build more prisons. NPR's Carrie Johnson reports the political conversations around crime have shifted a lot since then.
Violent crime is lower today than it was in the early 1990s, and many architects of that 1994 crime bill have come to consider it a mistake. That's because billions of dollars in that bill helped ramp up the use of prisons, raising incarceration and exacerbating racial disparities. In the decades since, policymakers have focused more attention on alternatives to incarceration, like drug courts and swift punishment for people who break the law. Crime continues to be a focus of political attack ads, but politicians are also talking more about mistakes and excesses in the justice system, including wrongful convictions. Carrie Johnson, NPR News, Washington.
In Southern California, evacuations continued in parts of San Bernardino County, where a more than 37,000-acre fire was burning. The CAL FIRE website says the line fire is 21% contained. Authorities say the fire was intentionally set. You're listening to NPR News.
This is KUOW News. I'm Kevin Kniested in Seattle. We've been gathering reaction today to the first Boeing machinist strike in 16 years. U.S. Congressman Adam Smith is urging Boeing and its machinists to return to the bargaining table as soon as possible, something both sides say they are ready to do. But Representative Adam Smith also said in a statement it is crucial that Boeing behaves as a responsible steward for its employees, so every employee is respected with fair wages and working conditions. Union leader John Holden agrees.
Boeing has to stop breaking the law, has to bargain in good faith, and we will be back at the table whenever we can get there to drive forward on the issues that our members say are important.
Holden says in addition to a larger wage increase and the restoration of the pension program, union members also want more paid time off. Holden says they've had the same schedule for more than 30 years. New numbers just released by the National Interagency Fire Center shows wildfires have burned more than 55,000 acres in Washington state so far this year. This as crews continue to battle fires like the Pioneer Fire near Lake Chelan and the Ruby Fire in the North Cascades National Park. Meanwhile, massive and fast-moving wildfires in places like California are affecting firefighting and prevention efforts here in the Northwest.
There's just not enough people to answer each fire appropriately with that same aggressive initial attack.
That's Oregon Department of Forestry spokesperson Jessica Newyear. She says the lack of resources continues as hot weather, strong winds, and lightning storms have sparked dozens of new fires, especially in the central part of the state. Some transportation news for you. The Seattle Department of Transportation has canceled this weekend's planned closure of the Ballard Bridge. We've got rain in the forecast, so crews won't be able to get their preservation and maintenance work done on the 107-year-old span. The bridge is still scheduled to close down to traffic next weekend and the first 3 weekends in October, weather permitting. And southbound 405 between Coal Creek Parkway and Northeast 30th Street in Newcastle will be closed this weekend. And northbound 405 from Northeast 44th to Coal Creek Parkway will also shut down between midnight and 4 a.m. on Sunday. This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include USPS, dedicated to providing businesses with shipping options, working to help businesses avoid shipping challenges with USPS Ground Advantage. Learn more at usps.com/advantage.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. My name is Bill Radke, and what we do the next hour or so is we're together here to talk about what happened this week, discuss it from different viewpoints, figure out what it might mean, and end you with something to smile about by the end of the program. I am not alone because my panel of journalists and thinkers and commentators. We got veteran Republican strategist and media commentator. Welcome back, Randy Pepple.
Thank you.
Good to see you. South Seattle Emerald writer and reporter Lauryn Bray. Welcome back.
Happy to be back.
Good to see you, Lauren. Seattle Times senior investigative reporter Patrick Malone. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Bill.
Thanks for coming. You know, Wednesday morning I was walking in Pioneer Square and saw a middle-aged couple with lattes walking down South Jackson Street wearing Cougar red and gold. And I said, "Good morning. You in town for the Apple Cup?" And they said, "We sure are." I said, "Well, enjoy the town. Have a great week." And the woman said, "Looks like it won't snow this year." It's a little early for the Apple Cup. You're going to watch the game for sure, Randy. I would.
Well, of course. I mean, I'm an old sports writer and covered the Huskies for many years, and so wouldn't miss the Apple Cup. But I've got to admit that playing it in September loses a lot of the luster, and frankly, that's on the UW. I mean, the UW led the implosion of the conference last year, and fortunately, Wazoo and Oregon State are starting to rebuild. They're up to the Pac-6 and on their way to the Pac-8. So maybe if Stanford and Cal look at a map and realize they really don't belong in the Atlantic Coast Conference, you could have a Pac-8 again.
Wow, I poked a bear just asking you about the Apple Cup. This is close to your heart.
Indeed, it is. I mean, I just think what happened with the destruction of the Pac-12 was a travesty, and we'll look back. And I think the university and its communities, its alumni will look back at that as a very bad move by the university and its leadership.
All right. Unable to enjoy tomorrow's game, Randy Pepple. By the way, we're on YouTube. You folks can see us. Just search KUOW and you can watch the show live stream. Okay, let's get to the news of the week. Big story this week. We got the official list of up to 21 Seattle public schools that might close next year to save money. KUOW's education reporter Sammy West told us it's hard to find yourself on that list.
After the school closure proposals dropped, some parents compared the moment to when the roster for a team sport or the roles in a play get posted. Everyone rushes to see if they made the list, and they walk away with a whole range of emotions. For Debbie Lou, it was shock and disappointment. She hadn't expected Green Lake Elementary to be one of the schools slated for closure. Her son just started kindergarten there on Monday.
We were looking forward to going to the school. When we toured it, it just seemed like such a wonderful group, and the parents and the students were just lovely, so we wanted our son to be a part of that community.
Lou hopes the closure won't affect her son too much, or the district will reconsider. Officials are expected to finalize the proposal in October, and the school board would vote before winter break.
There are actually two different lists of schools to close because the district is considering different ways of doing it. But if your school's on both those lists, you can rightly expect it's not going to be open. Patrick Malone from the Seattle Times, do you want to opine about whether is the district doing the right thing to address its deficit?
Well, I would like to speak to it maybe from a parents and kids perspective, which is where most of my experience has been. And, one consistent phenomenon that we've experienced in now our 5th year in the Seattle Public Schools is that this is a school district and a board of education that is not a firewall to the parents and the kids. They don't mind making decisions that are highly disruptive. There was, it brings to mind a year ago when they were late getting to the table to negotiate with the teachers. And, I know that's a two-way street, but the first day of school was literally delayed, something that had been planned on for months. And now you've got literally shutting down schools. And I get that this is, a factor of an intractable budget situation. But the fact of the matter is I've been in places that have, in many ways, less successful school districts, ones that maybe don't academically prepare kids as well, aren't as welcoming and maybe don't, have a lot of more sort of cultural problems. Say, for instance, the District of Columbia. But one thing that they was a firewall that tried to protect consistency and routine and schedules for parents and kids. And I just don't see that from Seattle Public Schools.
Well, how could schools have done different? What would be the better alternative to seeing you see declining enrollment, rising labor costs, and a deficit? So
they're going to have to do something, and buildings are a factor in this too. We need to keep in mind that some of the schools that were chosen, it's because that they've got buildings that are in disrepair as well. That would take an awful lot to get them, up to the standards that we want. So when you're facing low enrollment, aging buildings and things like this, it's sort of a necessary decision. But, I have to ask myself as a parent, and I think a lot of parents do, did the district do everything in its power before this reached us?
Lauren, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I've talked to other Seattle public school parents and people that have covered the district and written about it for the Emerald, and I think you are not alone in that sentiment. I think that historically the district has had a horrible track record of communicating or lack of communicating, so you're not alone in that. I will say, though, I do think that they are trying to kind of change that for the future. I have not heard of a district, like a public school district anywhere, consulting parents as to what schools should close and then coming up with like 2 proposals for like, this is what one path could look like and this is what the other path could look like, and then having transparency around exactly how much money it would save each path, and then which schools would close and the implications exactly of what that would lead to, I think is a good start. I do think that for parents like you, there's that historical lack of transparency that's kind of just like making this kind of the final straw that broke the camel's back. But as you mentioned, when you're in a situation of low enrollment and buildings that need repair, and there's other issues that are leading to the closing of these schools and budgeting issues. I know Randy had mentioned, so we're probably going to get to you, but you had mentioned that they had used COVID funding to fill budgeting holes, and that's a big no-no. So there's a lot that has led to this, but I think that as the steps that they're taking forth today forward, or from the proposals the meetings that they had where they were listening to parents and trying to hear concerns as best as they could to decide which schools to close. I think that definitely informed a lot of their decision as well. But I don't know. I think it's a hard thing. They've kicked the can down the road for a long time, and now they have to make a decision. And yeah, I don't think everybody's going to be happy.
Randy?
Well, first off, I am not a Seattle resident, and I've never had kids in Seattle public schools. And so my heart goes out to the parents who are looking down the road at their local public school that they're invested in and losing that for their child. And I feel bad about that. But it seems to me, and I don't understand it, but the Seattle public schools, despite being in one of the most activist cities in the country, has pathetic leadership and has had pathetic leadership for a long time. This is a budget question. They
have been complaining about a lack of state funding for us, particularly for special ed.
Okay, then if you aren't getting your state funding, then budget accordingly and don't. I mean, they're facing a $100 million budget deficit. The Seattle Times story that I read on this that we sent around buried the lead because it says we've got a $100 million deficit. 10 paragraphs later point out that the 22 teachers contract added $94 million to that deficit. They signed an unsustainable contract with their employees, and
it is an expensive place for a teacher to live.
Well, it is an expensive place. I understand that, but you can't sign that contract and then do anything other than whine about your budget problem. You created the budget problem yourself. Additionally, they use COVID funding, which is one-time funding from the federal government, for ongoing operations. That is just incompetence.
Well, what about the drop in money from, the funding comes based on enrollment, and enrollment is down. And this is not the first time it's happened. Enrollment goes up and down, and schools have been closed before.
Exactly. But they have created a problem now because they've had significant loss of 4,000 students down since 2019. They're seeing this going down and stair-stepping out, and it's because parents are leaving of their own volition. I mean, they're taking their kids elsewhere. And the school district is not adapting to that. It's still top-heavy, and this
is not adapting to it? What's the better way of adapting to it?
No, this is part of the adapting, but this is 1/3 of the problem. I mean, they're talking about closing all of these schools, and that's going to address, 26 to 31 million of a $100 million problem.
So you're saying cut teacher salaries?
I think they need to look at their personnel contracts and their administrative contracts and address those first.
By addressing, you mean cut salaries?
I cut salaries, cut people. I mean, one way or the other, you're right now you're saying we're going to cut schools to impact students directly.
Okay. Any reaction to that?
I'd say, start with the administration. Let's see what fat we can cut there, because with every teacher that leaves, either over salary issues or because they're forced to because their school shut down, there's a risk of harming the quality of education, which I think is the real big concern down the road here. We're talking about, I'm raising a 6th grader and a 4th grader, and these are kids that have been through the pandemic learning loss of them and their peers and things. So, I think if Seattle Public Schools has one thing they can hang their hat on, it's that they've been successful. They've had good test scores. They've produced successful people. They've produced successful alumni. What I want to see is them do everything in their power to sustain that, even in the face of these. And I think that starting with the administration is a great way to go.
Well, along with they're not just closing schools, they will be cutting staff and other expenses, according to the district, which you would expect when you're consolidating. That's the broad strokes. There's an option A, as Lauryn said, and an option B of, option A saves more money, closes more schools, eliminates K-8 schools, that's kindergarten through middle school, eliminates the option of going to a school you don't live near. Anyway, it's a lot, but you can go to the district website and you can enter your address and see where your kid might go. And there are, as Lauryn said, public comments. There's going to be public hearings and a vote. I think our reporter, Sammy West, said before the end of the year there'll be maybe an actual final vote on school closures. Did we cover it, Lauryn?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's item number 1 on KUOW's Week in Review. Again, I'm Bill Radke. We've got Randy Pepple, Lauryn Bray, and Patrick Malone with us. And number 2, First of all, did anybody watch the debate, the Harris-Trump debate?
I did.
All three of you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. At one point, Seattle came up because a moderator asked former President Trump if he had any regrets about what he did on the day of the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot. And Trump said, well, what about all the people pouring into our country and killing people?
When are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle, they went into Seattle, they took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Now, now for the rebuttal. No, I don't know if it's a rebuttal, Lauren. Mr. Trump gave us 4 claims there and a question. They went into Seattle from someplace else. They took over. That's one way to put it. A, quote, big percentage of Seattle. So that's a lie. Oh, and when are those people going to be prosecuted? Hint, they have been. How do you respond? And I have cut off Mr. Trump's microphone, Lauren. Proceed.
Yeah. So they have been prosecuted. And I think that's the funniest thing about this for me is they weren't prosecuted for the traditional like protest crimes that you get, like failing to disperse,
right,
disorderly conduct, or disturbing the peace. They were prosecuted and sent to prison for things like arson, for setting police cars on fire, and one, I think, I don't know if it was one, but I know at least one person was charged with having a unlawful possession of a destructive device.
Yeah, a homemade firearm.
Yeah. So either that or like some sort of homemade incendiary device. Yeah. So they were prosecuted and they went to prison, and I don't know if any charges for the protesters that were prosecuted were dropped, but I could certainly look into that. I'm sure there's might be a few people that were arrested for failing to disperse and maybe had those charges dropped. So I'm not going to say that it was just these protesters that were prosecuted for these major crimes and are in prison now, but they were prosecuted.
Yeah, in fact, we have a handy list on KUOW's daily newsletter. Dyer Oxley laid out the several people who were in fact prosecuted.
Oh, good, yeah. So, and Trump, as we all know, embellishes to the furthest extent possible, to the point that almost everything that he says, in my opinion, is a hyperbole. Most of what he says has very few facts supporting it, and he's unfortunately able to rely on the ignorance of the masses to platform himself. With that being said, CHOP protesters did not take over a big percentage of the city. It was the 2 blocks next to the intersections at the corner of Cal Anderson Park leading up to the park that they had occupied, and they had turned it into an autonomous zone that cops weren't welcome into. So yeah, not a big percentage of the city, just Cal Anderson Park and the blocks next to it.
But there were burning cars and looting and smashed windows.
Right. So
downtown. And
So
I wasn't going into over by Nordstrom and Old Navy.
And the 12th precinct is sort of near that autonomous zone that they were declaring cop free. There was a precinct there that they became their focal point.
Right.
Well, and the precinct that the cops walked away from, and I think that really, frankly, the protest activities at CHOP are really old news for those of us who've been here in Seattle. But one thing that's very much alive and burning in our minds is I still want to know the whole story about the communications that went on between the mayor and the chief of police as they walked away from that precinct. I mean, if you want to talk about one scandalous element of this that remains, it's that. They paid
deleted text messages,
and they paid handsomely to our outlet and others who sued over that. So, there's an admission that the mayor and the police chief did something completely untoward there, and Trump isn't talking about them.
Yeah.
When Trump says, when are those people going to be prosecuted, he's not talking about the deleted text messages.
No, and that's so interesting to know because I was still in college in New York when this was going on, so I did not have my boots on the ground as a journalist while this was happening. But that does not surprise me to hear that there was some behind the doors communications about this.
Well, and let's face it, the performative demonstrations that took place in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, the Chaz, and then renamed the CHOP, have been political since the time they were taking place. I mean, I still recall the governor, Jay Inslee, being asked about his thoughts on the Chaz, and he goes, "That's news to me."
Oh, I remember.
He pretended it didn't even exist because it was inconvenient.
I need to clarify that. He was specifically asked about a report that protesters at the Chaz at the time were not letting people come and go freely. And he said, "That's news to me. I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I haven't heard about that from a credible source. Before I espouse an opinion, I should know of which I speak." Because he had already activated the National Guard a week and a half before that news conference. So he wasn't pretending that he didn't know. He was
pretending he didn't know what was going on in the occupied zone, and perhaps he did not. And you can leave it to your own imagination as to whether the governor in the state should know that. But he was trying to avoid all comment at that time about what was going on in Chaz and Chop. And the reality is that's because it was a political spectacle. And on the other side, Donald Trump using it the same way. He didn't use it to point out, as Lauren said, he could have used it as to point out a policy difference, not that they weren't prosecuted, but, the city walked away from it. Or he could have said, or they were hiding the records. I mean, that was right up the conspiracy theory alley. Like, as Patrick said, that question remains unanswered. He didn't do any of that. He just threw it away as a political tactic. And, it's just rhetoric for him, as Lauren said.
And this rhetoric can be dangerous, though. Let me just say that, like Seattle, we got off easy, right? He's been out there spreading misinformation, including in that debate about a lot of communities. And let's look at Springfield, Ohio, where just this morning they had to evacuate 2 schools where immigrant children go to school, people who have lives that Donald Trump cannot relate to. And now he's made their lot worse by bringing up stuff that just is frankly, exaggerated, taken one pale beyond the truth, and these kind of things.
Talking about rumors about immigrants in Springfield, Ohio.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I know that it's been the source of a lot of humor to a lot of people, even to people who are sympathetic to these people's plight. But look, this goes to show sort of the tone that a president, former or current, can really set for this country. And when somebody says, it's okay to lie about a group of people that you don't know what sort of fury you're unleashing on their everyday lives. I mean, this can be a little more dangerous than
And yet he said that exact same thing in reference to himself, that it's what the Democrats were saying is why he had to take a bullet.
Which is also not substantiated. There's no evidence that the
substantiation is not his calling card.
No, but you're not equating his.
No, I'm saying he said that during the debate.
I know, yes, yes.
He will take that same argument and go, yes, the words matter if they're used against me.
Yeah. Yep. He has great empathy.
But you're not equating that with Inslee having activated the National Guard and then said at a news conference, I don't know about this report. I haven't confirmed it yet.
What I'm equating it to is they address it in political terms, not in policy or in we're going to fix this terms.
Yeah.
I mean, City of Seattle did walk away from part of the city for 3 weeks. That's unacceptable. And
in fact, some businesses sued the city, saying it was
the city's just paying out taxpayer money. Oh. It's not their money; they don't care.
Well,
city officials are just paying that out. For Jenny Durkin, the former mayor. I mean, she was a U.S. attorney. She knows the law better than all of us combined, and she broke it. And those messages were deleted off her phone. Oh, we don't know how. I mean, come on. And police chief, same way. And technically, the police chief is supposed to follow the law, is my understanding. And those texts, all the messages disappeared. I mean, it's way too convenient. That's the travesty, not, what Trump said during the debate.
A month after the CHOP was taking shape in that summer of 2020, on the 4th of July, a group of Black Lives Matter protesters walked onto Interstate 5 at night, early morning in downtown Seattle. The police closed I-5, closed on-ramps. They didn't close the off-ramps, or at least not all of them, and a man drove the wrong way up an off-ramp and then around onto the freeway into the protesters, killing one person, Summer Taylor, and hurting another. That driver pled guilty last year, was sentenced to prison, but Summer Taylor's family sued the state, saying troopers should have done more, blocked ramps with a patrol car or flashing lights or barricades, spike strips, something. And this week, yesterday, a King County jury found that the driver, not the state of Washington, is liable for $6 million in damages to Taylor's family. Did that seem like justice to anyone here, or injustice to anyone here?
I just have a few questions, because my whole thing is, anytime that I've seen protesters blocking off I-5 or any sort of highway, we kind of knew that that was going on, or there was some sort of sign that that was happening. So I want to know, like, if this driver was like oblivious and like did not know that there was a demonstration going on, or if he was like so in a hurry that it was like, I don't care about these protests, I'm gonna go where I need to go, because that changes it for me, you know. And
but not the state's liability, though, right?
The state being
and in this case, the protests have been going on. This was not the first time. The driver acted in a malicious and intentional manner. I mean, that is clear from the facts, and that's why they got convicted. But I think the state's argument is pretty clear-cut. If Summer Taylor had been following the law, she'd be alive today. You know?
In that,
and if the driver had not broken the law and driven down the exit ramp and ran over somebody, they would be alive today. So that takes the state off the hook. They're supposed to block every exit ramp on I-5 because somebody wants to break the law and march down I-5? You know what? The jury got that part right. Not finding some measure of culpability for the protester, though, I think was a missed opportunity. It was Summer Taylor's own actions that put her there. Nobody else's.
right. But if you live in a country where you kind of have no say in what the government is doing, and you want to protest and show your lack of complacency with it, protesting is in our First Amendment. Like, that's the way that you would do it. So I can't agree with that entirely, because protesting and what she did is protected by our Constitution. Or sorry, what they did is protected by our Constitution. So I'm not entirely sold on that one.
I have an idea here. I think that I'd like to know how the State Patrol is going to handle this the next time that I-5 is blocked. Are they going to say, hey, look, we know some people are going to potentially come up these ways? It's going to be very telling to me about whether they think they did a good enough job. You know, I just think it's tragic, you know, the loss of a human life over something that could have gone differently. I'm sad about that part. That's just the human part of me that's sad about that. And I just think that without ascribing blame really to anyone beyond the driver, I would ask the State Patrol if they think they did everything in their power to stop this, and if they would do it differently next time.
That's a good question, because I don't even know what State Patrol I guess I'm talking to my own KUOW's newsroom. That's a good question to ask of the State Patrol. What is policy, and would you do anything differently?
I believe they already started doing it different. I mean, after this occurred, they started blocking the on-ramp or the exit ramp so that you couldn't get down.
Off ramps and on all access points.
I believe that occurred.
Okay.
You know, and that's because, hey, somebody shows you a flaw.
Right.
You know, or a way they're going to get around what you thought was a good plan. I mean, they had a sign that says closed. I mean, there's a flashing light that says this isn't
do not
this
enter.
Is our off ramp.
Yeah.
Do not enter.
Yeah.
But now, you know, we're going to have to put up more barricades because people got around it. So I believe they've already done that, Steve, but I'm not positive.
It does make me feel like, you know, 100 other things I've seen police do that are like, oh man, sorry, we got that wrong that time, but don't hold us responsible. We're going to do it differently next time. So I think that if you give a darn about security, you know, I used to cover national security, so these little details get really, you know, set off big red flags in my mind. If your job is security, are you really taking it that seriously if you're leaving half of the options to get on that highway open? Because, like, you know, I mean,
there's a difference between wise policy and jury liability. They might be the same thing, or they might not.
And that's where I'm in the gray area is like, I don't know the letter of the law well enough to know this, but what I can say is they left some vulnerabilities there from a security standpoint, and then somebody died.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to pause there on KUOW's Week in Review. You're listening to Patrick Malone right there from the Seattle Times, and We also have South Seattle Emerald's Lauryn Bray and Republican strategist Randy Pepple. I'm Bill Radke. We are live streaming on YouTube. And speaking of streaming, it's like a soda stream coming up after we take a break. We're going to talk about soap and soda and check in on Washington initiatives that you, listener, will get to vote on pretty soon. So don't go away.
Hi, I'm Neil Kirksall. As news happens, we connect with the people who are closest to the story. We've done it for more than 50 years now. Join me and Chris Howden tonight and every weeknight on As It Happens.
Tonight at 9 on KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. Neil Stevenson discusses his new book, Polo Stand, the first in a new science fiction series, Tuesday, October 15th at 7 p.m. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of The Wild. On our next episode, we head deep into California's redwood forests to experience the awe and majesty of the tallest trees on Earth and the connection that local indigenous people share. We'll learn about the biodiversity of this unique ecosystem and how scientists are trying to save these ancient forests by cutting trees down. Listen to The Wild tonight at 8 or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Week in Review. I wish we had just aired that discussion we began about the appeal that I don't get of bubbly water, but that was it your dad?
My dad is
Gets
obsessed.
it? Yeah. Okay. We're talking here on KUOW's Week in Review, mostly talking about the news of the week, what happened, and what you might think about it from different points of view, or helping you think through it. So a moment ago, we were talking about Seattle policing and a former president's fantasy of Seattle exploding. There actually is a big actual development going on in Seattle policing. This week, a city council committee said yes to 2 anti-crime measures that the sponsor calls soda and soap. So that's stay out of drug areas and stay out of areas of prostitution. They couldn't do stay out of prostitution areas because that's SOPA, which means soup. So it's soda and soap, and these zones let police arrest people who enter areas, zones where they have been not necessarily convicted of, but even just charged with offenses related to drugs or to buying sex. Anyone think this is a good idea?
Randy, you want to start?
Well, I am bothered by the fact that they're debating neighborhoods and putting a name on a neighborhood instead of just saying, we're going to enforce the laws in these neighborhoods and make them less attractive to people who are going to break the law.
Well, isn't this a way of that? Actually, in fact, they're saying, I mean, are they trying, let's take the prostitution one. Is the attempt to put an end to the world's oldest profession, or is it a way of stopping the shooting? I mean, it's a real problem. There's gun violence along Aurora Avenue North. So what are you saying the goal is?
Enforcing gun laws might be a good place to start. I guess I'm just bothered by the fact that the city's saying, we don't have control over the illegal activity in these areas, so we need extra police authority to take care of that. It's just like, can't you just enforce the laws that you have, as opposed to, saying,
so
if we've been accused
snatch
of something,
up all the
you
guns?
can't go here. No, I'm not talking about snatch up all the guns. I'm talking about arresting people for using guns and giving them jail sentences that keep them away from guns for a while.
Okay. Anyone else on drug and prostitution zones in Seattle, which we've had before? They were repealed and possibly being brought back.
Yeah, they were repealed, and it was found that they were discriminatory, and that is why they were repealed. And it was actually I forget which council it was, but it wasn't a super liberal council that repealed them too. So it was like people agreed that they were harmful. But yeah,
that was also in 2020. This has been a theme of our show, is that repeal happened in 2020.
That's because you're in one of the drug zones. I mean, this is
U District. Yeah,
with
that's
the
right.
U District, the
That's right.
University Way from 15th down to Brooklyn is one of the zones.
Yes.
So we're in the middle of that zone, and so
we have more to say about that. I think I may have interrupted you.
I'm
Lauren.
sorry.
I just want to make sure you had a chance to finish.
So if it was taken in 2020, then it was probably part of the movement around this time to get rid of that legislation policy that was disproportionately discriminatory.
Yes.
So, yeah. Okay. So, long story short, I feel like that this is not addressing root causes of the issue. If what we're really upset or scared about is the gun violence that's resulting from the trade of sex, why not address the gun violence? I'm kind of with Randy on that one, but we might have different ideas for solutions for that. But I don't.
What about, since you brought that up, Lauren? What about, or to any of you? One idea is to legalize the exchange of sex for money, so that it's, as you know, so that it's not in the shadows,
Well,
and therefore
it's
not a criminal enterprise.
I would agree with that, because a lot of the a big reason why women or sex workers that engage in this work kind of partner with pimps is for protection, and sex work being illegal is a huge part in that. So criminalizing sex work has shown that leads women to consulting and working with pimps rather than working on their own. And that's because of like harassment from cops. There's cops that will harass sex workers and kind of coerce them for services to get them off of their charges. So a woman might be more inclined to work with a pimp who will watch her as she does her business to make sure and kind of prevent that from happening, because there's always a car nearby that she can run into if like a cop starts harassing her.
And under these new laws, that would be called prostitution loitering, sort of basically facilitating prostitution would be. I think it's a gross misdemeanor. Anyone else on this?
I just think that there are a lot of reasons why this would fail. And most of them have to do with the current criminal justice infrastructure. We don't have enough cops. The courts are already packed. We can't, the jails are overflowing. So what are you going to do with these people? And then what? You're going to push them into residential neighborhoods that now aren't the problem? Yep. So I just see this as sort of like maybe getting ahead of ourselves, or potentially it just being, God forbid that anybody in government would do something for show. But I don't know that this, bold prediction here, it's not going to end addiction or sex work in Seattle.
But if I'm a city councilor and I'm not going to actually solve the problem, at least I can scatter it around from neighborhood to neighborhood so Green Lake and Bitter Lake don't have to deal with its concentration. Or as you said, Randy, we're in a drug zone, because they originally were talking about it just being downtown and the International District, but it got the drug zones got expanded to Belltown, Pioneer Square, Capitol Hill, University District, to prevent spillover, which gets to the moving of things around from neighborhood to neighborhood issue. So we've just expanded. Like if you're in Lower Queen Anne or First Hill, I guess that means you get the spillover, or what?
I don't think the city knows the answer to that question. They are trying desperately to search for a policy that doesn't actually involve enforcing the laws that are already on the books in the city. They don't need a new law. Start enforcing the law, and people will stop going to the areas. Are the pimps going to hang around if you have a cop on the same street corner? Here's the thing. I think you need to target the people who are breaking the law. And it starts there. And whether it's the pimps, which is leading to gun violence, then, hey, let's make sure that when you arrest one with a gun that you put the maximum charge on that gun possession instead of trading that off and letting them out. I mean, that's what's going on too often, is we are not actually enforcing the laws that we have on the books.
I think what Patrick talked about earlier is also something to keep in mind about we don't have space for when we arrest these people to hold them. King County Jail is running out of space. The Seattle just contracted with Score Jail in Des Moines to provide more beds for misdemeanor charges, which is literally only 20 beds that they've spent $2 million a year on. So it's not a situation where the solution is to just arrest more people and hold them in jails. We don't have the space to do that. I think that the root causes of these issues should try to be addressed. I know everybody gets so tired of me talking about these things because I always have such big dreams and big ideas for how to address these problems. But ultimately, the legislation that's been passed or that the council has agreed upon passing will not change any of these things. It might change the way that it looks, but it's still going to happen. Prostitution, as Bill says, is the world's oldest profession. And if gun violence really is the concern, we should be addressing that.
Okay, let's, since we're talking about legislation that may or may not address problems, let's move from city to state. Week in Review listeners, you're going to have the chance to vote starting next month on 4 state initiatives that would prevent or reverse some work being done by our Democratic-controlled state legislature. And there is a new poll out. I'm very poll skeptical, but Randy, you watch polls, so let me ask you, do you respect the Cascade PBS Elway poll?
Yes, the methodology that Stu Elway, who's a proud UW graduate, he got his doctorate in stats here.
I know Stu, he has great neckties.
He's good, and I have no reason to look at these numbers and believe that they are substantially off in any way.
So let me just relate top line. This latest poll of registered voters shows that the initiative to prevent the state from phasing out natural gas is so far comfortably ahead. It's just a poll, but 47% yes to 29% no, because these initiatives would be rollbacks. The initiative to make paying into the long-term care program optional instead of mandatory, that's much closer, 39% yes on that, 33% no, so that's a yes vote for this, I guess. Republican initiative is too simplistic, but I'm trying to help listeners keep track of the yes and the no.
Conservative initiative and supported by the Republican Party. Absolutely.
Right. So slightly ahead for the conservative-backed initiative there. However, the capital gains tax repeal was down, losing in this poll 52 to 30%, and the initiative to end the carbon tax trading system losing in this poll 46 to 30%. So that tells you what, Randy?
What it tells you is that the money that's being spent on the no side is having more of an impact on the absence of money being spent on the yes side. I mean, the yes side in these initiatives spent $6 to $8 million to qualify the initiatives, to gather the 400,000 plus signatures for each one of the initiatives that we'll be voting on. And there is not a reserve fund available or that's been put into the public disclosure reports that shows that there are millions more for advertising to now reach the voters that will turn out and decide this, which in Washington State in a presidential year, plus or minus from 80% of our state's voters will turn out. And many of them will know very little about these initiatives other than what they see in advertising and what they read in the on the ballot itself. And that's absent advertising on the side to say, look, you're paying for initiatives too much. And the vote yes, pay less is their slogan, unless they can put a little more meat on those bones to tell people why. They've got a tough road.
Okay, that's veteran Republican strategist and media commentator Randy Pepple. Other thoughts on these initiatives?
Well, I think that looking at the long term...
This is the Seattle Times reporter Patrick Malone.
Hello.
Investigative reporter.
So I think when we look at the repeal of the long-term care tax, I think that one had appeal across political ideologies. Everybody hated that thing right before they were about to trot it out and be like, okay, here's the practical impact of something we did to you. It was like we all discovered right when they were about to take it out of our paychecks, like how awful this was and how little we were going to get for it. So that one, I think, has a little more universal.
I'm happy for you that you won't need long-term care, by the way.
Well, yeah. Hopefully I will someday, but like that's
good point. Lucky. Good point. You cut that either way.
And the state's going to cover the first month and a half with taxes you've started paying now.
That gives we'll call that the hurry up and die period, right? Where you just hope you don't have to stick around beyond that. But I do think, to be fair here and to be like just perfectly frank and candid, that the capital gains repeal in particular and the carbon initiative repeal both, come off as pretty partisan. Those are very much red meat, ideological, Republican places to plant your feet. And the think tank that is behind a lot of these is doing what it's supposed to do, which is bring up conservative issues, even if it's in a state where that doesn't seem to go well. I honestly thought that the carbon repeal might have a little more traction than it does. One, because it's really confusing still. Two, we haven't really seen the ultimate, like, are we ever going to get to these promises? But that's also a reason
promises of the money being spent from the revenue coming in from the auctioning off
to
the right to
green
pollute.
initiatives,
Yes.
right? And so, but we're 1 year into this, and I think that a lot of people feel like maybe that's premature. This sort of has a tinge of the Obamacare repeals that we saw so repeatedly within a year of Obamacare. It's like, let's see if it works a little first before we pull the plug. But by the same token, I think that one could be in play in future years. I mean, they have not demonstrated, the supporters of this carbon initiative have not demonstrated in the short period that they've had that it's going to be everything they said it would be. So that one might be more vulnerable in future years.
And they're not going to be able to show you that it's reducing emissions because they're not tracking that. And so if you cared about whether you were actually fulfilling your campaign promises, you would be tracking the emissions.
Wait a minute, doesn't the state ecology department measure emissions?
Since 2019, that data has not been updated. And when asked specifically about the Climate Commitment Act, which is the name for the carbon tax, what are the reports? What's being put together to monitor the emissions? They admitted there isn't any.
Well, yeah, I heard that the data is old, that it's delayed. But you're saying the state ecology department is not even tracking
They are not
emissions?
tracking specific to the spending on the carbon initiative, the carbon tax.
Oh, so
they're not tracking that. They're not saying.
You mean they can't demonstrate that this investment resulted in this exact emission
They're not
reduction?
trying to say what all of the investment. In other words, they don't have a tracking mechanism.
This is port electrification and EV chargers and
so far it's been mainly hiring government workers to do studies about it.
Well, that's
frankly.
Isn't Patrick saying that's the early part?
The early part is they have grown the size of government, and this is part of the argument against it. Is the state is saying the sky will fall if the voters take this away.
Are you talking about the ballot language?
Yeah. No. This is what the opponents are saying. You look at the advertising. This is so vitally important. If we take this away, it'll eviscerate the state. It'll blow a hole in the state budget. They just started collecting it this year. They have doubled the size, and by they I mean the Democratic Party. They have doubled the size of state government during Jay Inslee's time in office. They spend over $35 billion in operations of state government. And so a brand new tax that they just started getting money from this year, if you take that away from them, oh my God, the sky will fall. They can't be trusted.
Lauren, I haven't turned it to you yet. Any thoughts?
Hearing that they're not tracking emissions is kind of crazy.
Well, I don't know that they're not tracking emissions or whether I have to look into that.
Though, I will say, just to underscore Randy's point and to say, whoa, Lauren, this is going to freak you out. It freaked me out. When my colleagues did a recent series of stories about data centers, right? They're absolutely blowing the green goals out of the water here, and the state is not being fully transparent about it. So
these data centers suck so much energy that we're not going to be able to rely on the same kind of hydropower and resources that we thought
they're
we would.
disruptive to that. Now the rights to that water are falling into certain hands that are not going to be the stewards of them that agriculture and others have been. So, I think there is a big, fat, throbbing question mark over whether Washington is living up to all these green promises and the things that the leaders that have been elected repeatedly here have said are their top priorities.
Okay, before we take a break, Lauren, did I let you finish?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that I have to get into to understand all of this because it's very convoluted to me. But, yeah, I mean, Green New Deal, man. That's all I got to say.
Green New Deal. I haven't heard that phrase in a while. That was a. 2020 has really been the theme of this. Can
I mention one thing real quickly that sort of circles back to an earlier topic we had today? But the capital gains tax repeal would then further minimize what Seattle Public Schools has to work with. Just saying, in terms of we're talking about this. K-12 is one of the things that the capital gains tax does benefit.
Okay, we've got, that question of whether the state has enough money, that's a whole show and a half. Let's pause on KUOW's Week in Review. South Seattle Emerald's Lauryn Bray here, Seattle Times' Patrick Malone, Republican strategist Randy Pepple. We're on YouTube. You know how that goes. We'll be right back.
In some ways, Springfield could have been an opportunity to discuss the challenges of receiving large numbers of immigrants. Instead, it got flattened by a presidential campaign trying to score points at all costs.
I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. That's today on The Daily from the New York Times.
Following the BBC NewsHour at 2 o'clock on KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from the Amazon Housing Equity Fund, partnering with nonprofits like the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle to help create and preserve over 8,600 affordable homes across Puget Sound since 2021.
And from Horizon House. Horizon House, independent living on Seattle's First Hill, welcomes adults 62 and over from diverse backgrounds and cultures, including LGBTQ+. Learn more at horizonhouse.org.
KUOW's Week in Review is wrapping up here. We've got about 4 minutes left, so let me mention a few things. I can't believe I haven't had a chance to say that Boeing machinists are striking. They're on the picket lines right now for the first time in 16 years. Union members voted overwhelmingly 94% yes vote yesterday to reject Boeing's latest offer and strike. By the way, Boeing's lost money 6 straight years and has a credit rating that the Seattle Times pointed out is one rung above junk bond status. Any reaction to Boeing strike?
Boeing stock is already down. This is going to have a negative impact on the region, far bigger, I think, frankly, than any of the other stories we've talked about today. Because if you look at the rhetoric coming out of the union leadership and rank and file, they want to get back everything that's been taken from them, they believe, in the last 3 negotiations. And that means we could be looking at a Christmas strike.
Yeah.
And I think really the central issue here, if you distill it down to an elevator pitch, is the union disagrees that the 25% that Boeing says they've offered really is 25% because some other things are expiring.
Their bonuses are going away.
Right. And that's 4% right there. So I think, there's not a shared set of facts here for them to negotiate over. And until you have that, it's hard to get to an agreement.
Also, the downtown Seattle PCC reopening in a small format. The big, beautiful one at 4th and Union closed, and the co-op says today it's going to be a little 6,500 feet store, and next to that, they'll put a central office in there, and that's just a little nice downtown thing. I walk past that closed building a lot.
I do like PCC.
Yeah, it's kind of a happy place for me.
I heard they have really good chocolate chip cookies. I have not tried them. Anybody?
I stay away from such things. Lauren, can you confirm?
I'll have to get them for my dad, and he'll let me know, and I'll let you know.
Seattle's paying $5.75 million to settle a lawsuit by 2 injured bicyclists who blamed city streetcar rails for causing their crashes. The bike wheels get stuck in that groove, and so it could be, we need more separate bike lanes, or it could be again, Seattle Times, synthetic flange filler lets a heavy streetcar sink and stay on the rails, but a bike or a wheelchair won't sink down into that. But the city had said, that's too expensive to keep fixing those things, but more expensive than that legal settlement, and not to mention people getting hurt. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Can we take a break from people getting hurt and end the show on something that made us smile this week? Anything made you happy?
Okay, so
Lauren, you really perked up.
Yes. Okay, so King County Council member Gurmai Zahalai has proposed legislation that would commit $1 billion to creating workforce housing for essential workers.
Workforce essential workers?
Mm-hmm. So he has proposed a plan that would use the county's excess debt capacity, because apparently there's like $9 billion that the county can potentially borrow from banks to use for the county for purposes. And he has proposed that they take out $1 billion from that debt capacity and use that for the development of regional workforce housing for essential workers.
Okay.
And the cool part about it is it's going to be mixed income, ideally, if it gets passed. And the plan that he's proposing is to kind of offset the price of the rent based off of the income and rental restrictions that he's hoping will get proposed.
Okay, workforce housing. We have just under a minute, Patrick, smiling.
I'm really excited to see that there are places around Seattle that have Hatch, New Mexico green chili. That's the part of the country I'm from. You know, I've already gotten, over a bushel of it, and I've distributed green chili stew to select transplants from New Mexico and southern Colorado, and it just brings me a lot of joy, a taste of home.
What I don't love about bubbly water, I do have an equal amount of love for chilies from New Mexico.
Well, you're going to be on the list for the next batch.
How about you, Randy?
Patrick, as a proud member of the El Dorado High School, Albuquerque, New Mexico class of 1980, who made pozole myself out of my own frozen red chili on Sunday.
Wow!
If you want to send some to me, I'll take that Hatch green chili.
Wow!
What made me smile this week was that the Pac 8 at least is coming back. We talked about at the top of the hour, but Wazoo and Oregon State are starting to reassemble a Pacific Coast Conference for intercollegiate athletics, and I think that's a good thing.
Colorado State in a Pacific Conference.
Well, we had University of Colorado already, so
I'm not sure Fort Collins is even on this side, the Pacific side of the Continental Divide.
I can tell you, having lived there, Bill, that it is not.
Okay.
Water flows the other way.
We got to go. That's KUOW's Week in Review. Republican strategist Randy Pepple, South Seattle Emerald's Lauryn Bray, Seattle Times investigative reporter Patrick Malone, Sr., that is. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Enjoyed this time. Thank you, producer Kevin Kniestedt and Kathy Faulkner running the board, Juan Pablo Chiquiza, Hans Twite. I'm Bill Radke, and we'll see you in a week.
Support for KUOW comes from HealthPoint, which believes people deserve expanded healthcare services, not limitations. That's why HealthPoint provides comprehensive medical, dental,